Hi, I'm Rowena Mace, and 3 weeks ago, my own sister made me wait 3 hours at the bank we used to run together, just to humiliate me. She told the staff I wasn't bank-worthy, that this place was for rich, important people. But what none of them knew was that I founded the damn bank. They erased my name, my legacy, and hoped I'd stay quiet. But what happens when the woman they tried to bury shows up with the receipts? I pushed through the revolving doors of Evergold Trust in downtown Dallas, my palms slightly damp with anticipation. The spring morning sun glared against the building's mirrored glass facade, bouncing light across the plaza. For a moment, I had to pause, shield my eyes, and gather myself. 15 years ago, walking into this lobby would have felt like stepping onto holy ground. Back then, this building wasn't just steel and glass, it was a dream, one we had built, brick by brick, vision by vision. Today, it felt less like a monument and more like a fortress that had been taken from me, its gates barred, its history rewritten. I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress. Neat, modest, a deliberate choice. No designer logos, no unnecessary flourishes. I wanted to look like myself, not like the image my sister cultivated for press photos. Tucked under my arm was a leather folder, its edges frayed from years of use. The folder held my past, my proof, my quiet defiance. No guard came to escort me. No assistant rushed forward to usher me inside. I walked up to the reception counter, head high, though my heart pounded a steady drumbeat in my chest. The woman behind the glass partition didn't even glance up at first, her eyes fixed on her monitor, fingers clicking across the keyboard with detached precision. To her, I was just another stranger in a stream of strangers. "Can I help you?" she asked finally, without softening her tone or her gaze. I opened my mouth, the rehearsed words catching suddenly in my throat. On the drive over, I'd practiced the line, "I'm here as family, to discuss my account." But here, standing under the fluorescent glare, those words felt impossibly heavy. They carried too much history, too much demand. Instead, I said carefully, "I need help with one of the old accounts." She gave me a quick glance, assessing me with mild impatience, then gestured toward the elevators. "Banking center is on level 5. Please take the elevators down the hall." I nodded, hiding the sting behind a mask of composure, and turned in the direction she indicated. The hallway split in two. To my left, the plush waiting lounge opened up, filled with gleaming leather chairs, clients sipping coffee from porcelain cups, and sleek tablets glowing in their hands. Laughter rippled easily in that space, the laughter of those who belonged, but I wasn't led there. Instead, the receptionist's directions steered me down a back corridor, colder, narrower, humming faintly with the air conditioning. I was asked to sit in a corner near a restroom, on a hard plastic chair pushed against the wall. The faint scent of disinfectant lingered there, mingling with the sterile chill of recycled air. It felt less like a guest area and more like a place to tuck someone away until they gave up and left. Time dragged. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. No one came. No banker approached. No staff member acknowledged me. Finally, restless, I stood and walked back to the front desk, my folder clutched tightly against me. This time, a younger woman, brisk and sharper in her movements, caught sight of me. Her brows knit together immediately. "Excuse me, can I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped, her tone already edged with suspicion. I answered softly, forcing calm into every syllable. "I requested help earlier." Her eyes swept over me, the plain dress, the worn folder, and her expression hardened. She called for the supervisor, her words curt, her posture stiff. The air shifted, the kind of tension that makes strangers glance up from their phones, wondering what's wrong. And then, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place, Isolde appeared. My sister. The executive whose name graced every press release, whose face appeared in glossy magazines, whose speeches filled shareholder meetings. She walked into the lobby with perfect posture, her tailored charcoal suit cutting sharp lines, her heels striking the marble like a drumbeat of authority. Her eyes found me instantly. A flicker of recognition passed, quickly masked with thin contempt. She cleared her throat, and when she spoke, her voice carried easily across the polished lobby. "This place isn't a charity," she announced, her tone clipped and public, designed for the clients within earshot. "Are you sure you're not in the wrong building?" The word sliced through me, a dismissal, a declaration. She wanted the room to hear it, to witness my humiliation. My hands trembled faintly, but I gathered myself, pressed steel into my voice, and answered loud enough for others to hear. "No, Isolde. I've come here for what I built, once." Heads turned. A few whispers rippled. For a moment, her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. I turned and walked back to the corner where they'd seated me, each step steady, though my heart thudded like a hammer. The lights overhead felt harsher now, glaring white against the marble, illuminating every crack, every shadow. I sat, folding my hands over the folder in my lap, and closed my eyes. Memory came unbidden. A younger version of myself and Isolde, sitting at a kitchen table scattered with papers, sketching blueprints for our future. We had once been partners, planning expansions, pooling funds, convincing investors. Late nights and early mornings had bound us together. We dreamed the same dream. And yet now, she treated me as though I had never existed, as though the foundation beneath her empire had not been laid by both our hands. A cart rolled by. A young intern, not more than 20, pushed it carefully, offering bottled water to staff. He paused when his eyes landed on me. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, recognition, hesitation. Finally, he reached into the cart and extended a bottle toward me. I accepted it with quiet thanks. He lingered, awkward, then said, almost in a whisper, "I thought I recognized you. Maybe from some of the old documents and archives." His voice trembled, like he wasn't sure he should have spoken. I smiled faintly, though my chest ached. "Maybe," I said softly. "Sometimes the walls forget who laid the first brick." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and wheeled his cart away. Beside me, on the wall, hung a polished brass plaque listing the founding members of Evergold Trust. The names gleamed, catching the light. I scanned them carefully. My name, once etched into the earliest drafts of incorporation papers, was absent, erased, as though it had never been there. I sat in silence, staring at the plaque, the water bottle cold in my hand. Then I rose, folder pressed tightly under my arm. I drew in a breath that steadied me, whispered under it, "She has no idea I kept the originals." And with that, I turned back toward the elevators, ready for what came next. He looked at the name on the file, then back at me, his eyes widening in a flicker of recognition that could not be disguised. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. The world around me seemed to hush into stillness. The faint hum of the air conditioning overhead, the distant echo of polished shoes on marble floors, the clipped coughs and throat clearing of waiting clients. Every detail of the lobby pressed in around me, but all I could see was the way Darian's expression shifted, recognition, disbelief, then something heavier, like realization settling in. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet, but carried with it the weight of the moment. "Rowena?" He lifted the file slightly, as though the paper itself demanded reverence. "This says, founder. 49% share." "Why was your name erased from the ledger?" My pulse pounded so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. I steadied my voice, each word deliberate. "Because they were afraid," I said. "Afraid of what I knew, and afraid of what I might one day claim." The words hung between us, as sharp as any blade. Darian's gaze darted briefly across the lobby. He shifted the file under his arm, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for me. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll be back." I watched him disappear into the hallway, the file tucked close to his chest. And in that moment, something in the air around me changed. The posture of a powerless visitor, an invisible intruder, vanished. I sat taller, shoulders back, chin lifted. The murmur of clients resumed, but their glances toward me were no longer idle. They studied me, whispered about me. Even the receptionist, who had earlier brushed me aside, leaned subtly forward, craning her neck as though trying to piece together who I really was. Isolde was not physically present in that lobby, but her presence pressed against me nonetheless. It was in every sideways glance, in every stiffened posture. She lived in the walls of this building like a ghost that cast judgment. Time dragged like wet sand. 30 minutes bled into 60. Each tick of the wall clock stretched taut. I clasped the folder in my lap until the leather creaked, my palms sweating against its edges. At last, Darian reappeared. His eyes scanned the lobby before landing on me. Without a word, he motioned me toward a side corridor, one leading to the bank's archive wing. I rose, steadying my breath, and followed. The murmur of the crowd swelled briefly as I left the corner, then quieted again. The archive hallway was hushed, dim, and lined with doors. Darian pushed one open, ushering me inside. It smelled faintly of dust and ozone, like paper and old machines. He closed the door behind us, lowering his voice. "Okay," he began, glancing at me, then at the folder under his arm. "I found something. The legacy database still has your name listed, but it's flagged as inactive, hidden under a shell account. Someone transferred the shares 5 years ago." The words struck like ice. My throat tightened. "Do you know whose name?" He hesitated, almost as though saying it aloud would change something irrevocable. Finally, "Yes, Isolde Crane." My jaw clenched. Memories poured in. Her name printed on banners, glowing on conference room screens, splashed across press releases as co-founder. Piece by piece, my identity had been erased while hers grew into legend. "Can you restore it?" My voice carried quiet fire. Darian's lips pressed thin. He nodded, but his eyes revealed caution. "Not by myself. System admin access is required. Approval codes. It would need more clearance than I can pull alone." I let the silence hold for a moment. Then, slowly, a plan began to crystallize. "Then build a parallel trace," I said. "Document every change. Timestamp everything. Create a chain they can't deny. Evidence that can't be erased." Something in him shifted. He straightened, as though my resolve strengthened his own. "I'll do it. But under one condition, you don't confront her directly until I've secured proof." I exhaled, the weight in my chest easing into something sharper, steadier. "Agreed." He leaned closer, voice almost inaudible. "Be careful. Someone's watching." My pulse spiked, but I forced calm into my tone. "I've walked invisible for too long. If they want a fight, they'll get one." We turned toward the back of the archive section. The door groaned faintly as Darian pried it open. Inside, dusty filing cabinets stood like tombstones of the past, backup drives stacked neatly in metal drawers. He crossed to an older console, its screen flickering to life as he typed in rapid commands. I hovered behind him, breath shallow, heart pounding in rhythm with the scroll of code and log entries across the screen. Then he froze. "Here," he said. His finger pointed to a line of text. "Transfer. Owner. Rowena Mace. Isolde Crane. Date. 2018 to 11 to 12. Reason. Medical leave directive." My breath hitched. The phrase seared itself into my mind. "Medical leave directive," I whispered. Darian's jaw tightened. "It was forged," he said. "The clause was altered after the fact." Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. All those years of silence, of watching her wear a crown built from my foundation, all those years of standing in shadows while she thrived under lights I once helped ignite. And here, in the dim glow of a forgotten archive room, I was reclaiming truth. We copied the logs, exported encrypted files, duplicated them to multiple backups, each hidden in separate locations. The evidence grew before my eyes, digital bricks rebuilding what had been torn down. Darian turned to me, voice steady. "You should go back to the lobby. Let me finish the back end. They won't suspect anything yet." I nodded, gathering the folder into my arms. My hands no longer shook. Walking back through the hallway, I passed under rows of fluorescent lights that now felt less oppressive, more like spotlights following me. When I re-entered the main lobby, eyes lifted again. The receptionist's gaze met mine, not dismissive this time, but curious, cautious, almost respectful. No one spoke, but their silence was different now, weighted. I returned to my seat in the corner, sat down with deliberate calm, and folded my hands atop the folder. I didn't fidget. I didn't avert my gaze. And I sat as though I belonged, not by permission, but by right. A woman across from me whispered softly to her companion, "Who is she?" I allowed myself the smallest of smiles, the kind that blooms when invisibility cracks, when truth begins to seep into the light. For the first time in years, I felt it. Not imagined, not fragile. Real. I was no longer invisible. Cliffhanger. From where I sat, I caught the faintest reflection in the mirrored glass. A silhouette slipped into the executive hallway. Tall, elegant, familiar. Isolde. And this time, she wouldn't find me silent. The corridor smelled faintly of ozone and disinfectant, a sterile undertone that made every footstep sound too loud. I inhaled carefully, letting the cool, recycled air fill my lungs, and stepped into the narrow passage that led to the archive. Tile walls reflected the thin strip of light overhead. My shoes clicked a sharp metronome on the floor, each sound a small witness to the distance I'd come. Years of steps taken to be invisible, and now these new steps toward being seen. Darian was close behind me, the leather folder tucked against his chest, as if it were a relic worth guarding. We passed through the glass door stamped "Staff Only," the handle cold beneath my palm. It squeaked open like a secret ready to be exposed. Beyond the threshold, the building changed tone entirely. The low-lit server room breathed with life, racks of hardware lined the walls, LEDs blinking in patient constellations. The hum of fans was steady and deep, a living thing that vibrated up through my soles. The air had an electric chill, a reminder that this place kept history alive in code and circuitry. Darian moved to the console, fingers finding keys with the practiced economy of someone used to coaxing truth from machines. I stood behind him, shoulders tight, every muscle waiting. When he navigated to the archive, equity, legacy records, the screen populated with columns of names, dates, and ledger entries, rows scrolled in cold fonts, transfers, ownership logs, time-stamped edits. There it was, my name, printed in a font that looked almost official enough to be an accusation. Rowena Mace, founder, 49% share. For a beat, the world narrowed to that line. My heart slammed so hard I thought the fans might register it as interference. Darian's cursor hovered, then slid to the adjacent column. The line read like a betrayal. Current owner, Isolde Crane. Transfer date, 2018 to 11 to 12. A tightness shot through my chest. They transferred it, after my breakdown, I said, the sentence leaving my lips small and dry. Darian looked over his shoulder. The guilt in his eyes made the lines at his temple deeper. "It's true," he said quietly. "They made it look like you relinquished control. But the signatures are forged. They don't match your earlier documents." Righteous outrage flared under my skin, hot and clean. All the years of quiet, the footnotes of my life that had been footstool for a louder sister, bubbled up into one bright, furious thread. "We need every trail," I told him, my voice finding steel. "System logs, backups, audit trails, nothing can be allowed to vanish again." There was no pleading in my tone, just instruction. Darian's hands didn't hesitate. He tapped keys with a speed that turned commands into revelations. Hidden logs unfolded, audit trails that crawled through years, IP addresses that traced late-night edits to desks within the executive wing, timestamps that showed entries altered after hours. Each record was a drop of gasoline poured on the smoldering heap of truth I'd been nursing. The deeper we scrolled, the larger the pattern became. An architecture of erasure built on forged signatures and convenient excuses. Then, a small sinister red dot blinked at the top corner of his screen. A surveillance camera indicator, alive and watching. My throat closed. "What is that?" I whispered. Darian's fingers froze. He turned the screen for me. "They're watching. Someone just accessed the room, not with a badge but a system override. Remote." His voice dropped to a thread. "They can see us." All the theatrics of my plan condensed into that moment. We were exposed. For a pulse, I felt the old shaped fear of being outed, of being dismissed as a troublemaker, of having every stitch of truth undone by a hand quick enough to wipe logs and delete traces. It was the old script: silence, disappearance, erasure. I would not let them write it again. "We do this carefully," I said, pulling my attention back like a rein. "Quietly. No haste. I don't want us caught before the evidence counts." Darian moved faster. He encrypted the pulled logs, creating layered backups that folded into themselves like Russian dolls. He copied records onto a small, inconspicuous USB drive and ran encryption until the progress bar crept like a heartbeat. Then he nodded toward the network cable junction box and set up a shadow copy transfer, off-site routing, packets disguised as routine maintenance traffic. "I'll move this to a secure external server," he murmured. "We take it out of reach, out of any local purge." We retraced our steps through the labyrinth of corridors, boots muffled against the floor now that our purpose had sharpened. The bank's spaces had a different language suddenly. Every mirrored surface might reveal a watchful eye. Every receptionist's glance might hide a message. I felt observed, like a line had been drawn around me and someone had taken up the habit of peering in. Back in the main lobby, I sank into the same corner seat I had occupied earlier. The folder was no longer warm in my lap. Its weight had been transferred into encrypted servers and secured backups. The clerk behind the desk looked up and met my gaze. This time his glance carried curiosity, not the earlier clipped dismissal. There was a ripple in the room, a subtle recalibration of how they placed me in the landscape of that day. People who had passed me off as nothing at all were squinting, trying to see precisely where I fit. I forced my breathing slow, a practiced rhythm that kept panic from clogging my throat. "You're not pretending anymore," I told myself. "You're reclaiming what's yours." The phrase tasted both bitter and sweet, a kind of revivifying acid that cleared the fog. Across the glossy partition that separated the public lobby from the hush of the executive corridor, movement flickered in mirrored glass. A silhouette passed just behind the panes, a long, deliberate stride, the familiar shoulders, the signature grace that had once been our shared language and later became her armor. I held perfectly still, breath held like a bell clamped between teeth. And then, as if the building itself exhaled, the figure slipped out of sight. For several seconds, nothing happened. The world was an audible silence, all edges gone soft. Then the lobby resumed its hum, but not quite the same. The normal rhythm had been disrupted. Someone had cracked the facade. I felt it like a charge running under my skin. People glanced at one another in the way of the newly uncertain. The receptionist straightened, a frown knitting his brow. A couple paused in conversation and angled their bodies subtly my way, curious. I folded my hands over my knees, feeling steadier than I had any right to, and allowed the smallest of smiles to touch my face, not triumphant, but certain. The archive room had disgorged proof. The proof now breathed quietly beyond the bank's walls. Darian would keep building that trace, layer by layer, until there was no forcing it into oblivion. Someone might be watching. Systems might be patched. People might move to protect a false history, but properties of truth have inertia. Once set in motion, they gather momentum. They do not easily return to silence. On the mirrored glass, I caught a blurred motion again, someone appearing then vanishing down the executive hallway. It was Isolde's shape, unmistakable in its posture. For the first time in a long time, I no longer intended to be the one who evaporated when she walked by. I sat back, allowed the lobby noise to wash over me, and set my jaw. The quiet had changed. It was no longer the hush of exclusion, but the charged silence before a storm. I had lit the fuse. Now I would watch it burn. The moment the tiny red light blinked to life above the server racks, it felt like the air changed, charged, dangerous. It wasn't just a bulb flickering. It was a silent alarm, a crimson eye staring straight down at me. A jolt ripped through my chest, an electric warning that every hidden step, every whispered strategy was no longer in the shadows. Darian froze at the console, his fingers hovering inches above the keys, mid-command. His jaw clenched, his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He looked at me, then back at the monitors, and whispered, almost too low to hear, They're recording. It's live now. The words fell heavy, like a gavel. I pressed my palm against the nearest server rack, feeling the vibration run through my bones. The machines hummed with that steady thrum, like a great engine that had been awake longer than any of us, bearing silent witness to all the edits, the thefts, the buried names. Cold reality pooled in my chest. I steadied my breath. "Let them watch," I said softly, each word deliberate. "Today, the truth starts to shine." Darian's head snapped toward me, disbelief in his eyes. His voice cracked with urgency. "Do you really want them to see you? This isn't safe." I met his gaze without blinking. My voice didn't tremble. "They already tried to erase me. If I stay hidden, they win. From now on, I'll make myself impossible to ignore." Something shifted in his eyes, fear giving way to reluctant respect. He nodded once, then cleared a path for me, his body angled like a shield as we wove past the humming towers, blinking lights reflecting against our skin like tiny red and green stars. We slipped into a narrow security hallway, the silence there heavier than in the server room. He checked a manager's office, nudging the door open just enough to peer inside. Empty. He motioned me forward. Across the building, miles of carpeted corridors away, another story was unfolding. In her executive suite, lined with glass and chrome, Isolde Crane was mid-sentence on a conference call when a sharp ping lit up her screen. "Unusual file access. Legacy server." Her words faltered. The color drained from her face. Without excuse or apology, she ended the call, shoved her chair back, and strode out. Her team scrambled to follow, confusion etched into their features. Back in the hallway, I traced my hand across a wall panel where old portraits once hung. The brass plaques glimmered in the dim light, listing names of the founding visionaries. My name was nowhere to be seen. Her curation had been absolute, history rewritten so neatly that outsiders might never know there had been two architects instead of one. My throat burned. Sliding further inward, Darian and I reached a dim antechamber outside the legal archives. The air was stale, thick with dust. Floor lamps threw long shadows against cabinets and rows of sealed boxes. Dust motes floated in golden shafts of late afternoon sun. It smelled faintly of mildew and old ink. I paused, memory colliding with present. The boardroom 6 years ago replayed in perfect cruelty. Me standing small, trembling, their eyes cutting me down. Medical leave, they'd called it. Pushed papers. Silence bought with signatures I was too broken to fight. I remembered the tremor in my hand as I signed, tears burning behind my eyes, the terrible weight of thinking I had no other choice. "They chose to silence me," I whispered under my breath, my fingers curled into fists. "But I kept the truth." Darian broke my spiral with a spark of energy. He lifted his phone, eyes bright. "I found a backup," he said, voice taut with urgency. From his pocket, he produced a small, encrypted drive, its casing scratched but intact, stamped with a timestamp from 5 years ago. The sight of it stole my breath. "If anything happens to me," I murmured, my voice quiet but certain, "this goes straight to the state board." He nodded, slipping the drive into his jacket with care. "You've been planning this a long time, haven't you?" I allowed myself a thin smile, part bitter, part triumphant. Every day I spent behind the curtains. We sank into creaking chairs between dusty stacks of outdated law tomes. He connected the drive to a portable laptop, its faint blue glow the only light between us. One by one, files flickered open, version histories, signatures, metadata stamps. Our eyes scanned together, leaning close over the evidence. There were logs of covert transfers, trails of forged clauses, snapshots that could not be denied. Then, in the corner of the monitor, another red dot appeared. A different angle. Surveillance inside the archive room itself. My pulse spiked. "They know," Darian muttered, his shoulders rigid. He glanced behind us, scanning the shadows as though expecting someone to materialize. My chest thudded hard enough to ache. I leaned close, whispering, "We don't finish here. They're watching." Without hesitation, he yanked the drive free and shoved it deep into his pocket. "We'll complete the trace outside." We slipped out of the archive chamber, careful not to let panic quicken our steps. Our shadows stretched behind us, thin and elongated, as if we were being pulled backward, even as we moved forward. Every turn of the corridor felt sharper, every corner a question of who might be waiting. By the time we reached the main lobby, the late sun had shifted, painting the marble in colder hues. Patrons milled about the coffee station, sipping lattes, tapping at phones, unaware, or pretending to be, of the tension under the surface. I returned to my corner seat, folding my hands in my lap. The old leather folder was gone, no longer the talisman I clutched like proof of identity. Yet something more powerful had taken its place, the evidence Darian now carried, alive and preserved. The receptionist's gaze flicked up at me once, then away, but hesitated longer than before. I caught the faintest glimmer of recognition, like the shape of a half-remembered name pressing at the edge of thought. And then, in the mirrored glass of the executive partition, I saw her. Isolde's silhouette glided past, her stride deliberate, her outline sharp against the backlight of fluorescent fixtures. For the briefest moment, our eyes met through layers of reflection and glass. Hers narrowed, flickering with something that might have been anger or fear. I didn't look away. Not this time. A second later, she disappeared into the depths of the executive wing, the glass swallowing her whole. I exhaled, steady now. They had seen me. They had watched me. And yet, for the first time in years, I was no longer the ghost they thought they'd buried. I was visible. And I wasn't leaving. The words I had spoken in the glass-walled lobby still echoed inside me. Because the next time I come here, it won't be as a forgotten sister. It'll be as your majority shareholder. That declaration did not feel like bravado. It felt like truth finally dragging itself into daylight. When I reached the underground parking garage, the fluorescent lights buzzed above with their harsh, sterile glow. The cement walls threw back every sound, my footsteps, Marcia's quieter ones behind me, the distant slam of a car door somewhere down the ramp. Each echo reminded me of the battles I had already survived. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with resolve so sharp it felt like a blade. I knew Isolde's eyes were still on me, even if I couldn't see her silhouette anymore. She had retreated behind the mirrored glass of the executive hallway, but the knowledge that she was watching made me lift my chin higher. I walked with measured strides toward the far corner of the lot, where her luxury SUV waited. Marcia, my legal counsel and confidant, followed just a half step behind. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was reassurance enough. Every camera mounted along the concrete beams seemed to swivel, tracking me. I didn't shrink from them. Let them capture it all. Let the record show that I didn't cower in shadows anymore. Halfway across the lot, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out briefly, a single message from Isolde. "Don't do anything foolish." A humorless smile touched my lips. I slid the phone back into my pocket without reply. Foolish would have been staying silent all these years. This was something else entirely. When I finally reached her SUV, she was already there, flanked by two board members in tailored suits, the kind who had long grown used to nodding at her every word. She turned her head sharply when she noticed me approaching. For the briefest second, I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she smoothed it into that polished expression she wore like armor. A smile that wasn't a smile. "Rowena," she said smoothly, her voice controlled, cool as marble. "This is unexpected." I stopped directly across from her. I did not look at the board members. I looked only at her. My voice, when I spoke, was calm but resonant, carrying just enough for the others to hear. "Not as unexpected as what I've uncovered," I replied. "I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here to demand my rightful place." Her mask slipped just slightly, her eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. But she recovered quickly. She shook her head and let out a soft laugh, calculated to dismiss me. "You're delusional, little sister. You walked away. You chose to vanish. Don't rewrite history now." The words might have once pierced me. Tonight, they hardened me instead. "I didn't vanish," I said, each word sharp, unwavering. "You erased me. But tomorrow at 10 a.m., I'll be back here, with my attorney, with the documents, and the board will have one chance to come clean. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Isolde. She ignored him, tilting her chin higher. "So this is war, then?" she asked, her tone mocking, almost amused. I held her gaze, unblinking. "If that's what it takes." I didn't wait for her reply. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her laughter to echo hollow against the garage walls. Marcia fell into stride beside me, her briefcase swinging at her side. She didn't look back, didn't falter. Her voice was low but steady. "You did well," she murmured. "You struck first. That matters." Her words steadied me further. This wasn't just about emotion, it was about strategy, and now the first stone had been laid. We drove in silence through Dallas's evening streets, the skyline glowing against a navy sky. My mind was already leaping forward to what came next. But when the car finally pulled into the driveway of my old townhouse, I felt a deeper tremor. This was the house I had once left behind, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, shuttered for years, filled with dust and memory. Tonight, it was more than a house. It was the place where I had hidden the last of my father's truths. The door creaked as I opened it. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and mothballs, stale yet familiar. The wallpaper peeled in corners, and the furniture sat under ghostly sheets. But I wasn't here for comfort. I was here for evidence. Marcia followed silently as I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The wooden steps groaned under my weight. My hand shook slightly as I reached the locked trunk pushed against the far wall. I knelt, fitted the small brass key into its rusted lock, and twisted. The click was soft, final. When I lifted the lid, the scent of old paper rose up. Inside were yellowed documents, photographs, forgotten letters. And there, lying flat beneath it all, was the treasure I had buried years ago, my father's will. The ink had faded at the edges, but his signature was bold, undeniable. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the pages across the dusty floorboards. Marcia leaned in beside me, eyes sharp, scanning each line. And there it was, the clause I had always remembered but never had the courage to invoke. In the event my youngest is pushed aside, she retains override rights over all trust assets and decision-making, regardless of circumstance. A sob rose in my throat, but it wasn't the cry of a victim. It was something heavier, fiercer. It was the release of years of gaslighting, the shattering of the lie that I had been powerless. My father had left me a shield, a sword, a path back. "This is proof," I whispered, my voice breaking but sure. "This is my weapon." Marcia laid her palm gently on the paper, her eyes locking with mine. "Then tomorrow," she said softly, "we show them the truth." I gathered the documents carefully, sliding them into the leather folder I now held like armor. I relocked the chest, set the key back under the floorboard, and rose to my feet. Dust clung to my knees. I brushed it away with a strange sense of reverence, like shedding the last remnants of silence. As we stepped back outside, the sky had darkened into dusk. Streetlights flickered alive one by one, their halos soft against the growing night. Cars hummed along the avenue, neighbors carried groceries into their homes, life moved on around us, but for me, everything had shifted. I slid into the passenger seat, folder clutched tight. Marcia closed the driver's door and set her hand over mine briefly. "You ready?" she asked again, her voice low, steady, but with a hint of steel. I looked out at the city, the lights glittering like a battlefield waiting to be entered. I inhaled deeply, the weight of the folder anchoring me. "More than ever," I answered. Sleep would not come easily tonight. My mind was already pacing, preparing. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the board would face me. Tomorrow, Isolde would hear her name spoken against the truth. Tomorrow, the forgotten sister would walk back through those glass doors, not as a ghost, but as their reckoning. Tomorrow would bring the battle, and this time, I would not lose. I arrived at Evergold Trust's entrance just after 10 o'clock a.m. Light filtered through the glass facade, casting long reflections of my silhouette across the marble floor. I wore a tailored navy blazer and pencil skirt, professional, poised, determined. Marcia walked beside me, her presence a quiet shield. Staff exchanged glances. Whispers edged through the lobby like an approaching storm. But I did not flinch. I carried the weight of every erased year in my spine. A bank guard halted us halfway through the security checkpoint. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't proceed without authorization." His tone was firm, not rude, protocol. I reached into my folder and extracted a legal document, crisp and neatly folded. I handed it to him. "This is authoritative. Look up the majority clause. I demand access." He scanned the page, brow furrowing. "I need confirmation, permission from the board." I spoke quietly, but with conviction. "You can call the state board now, or I can step outside and show it to the media waiting beyond these doors." His eyes flicked to a bank of screens behind him. The lobby cameras had already registered me. After a tense pause, he nodded. "You may pass." The gate clanged open. I stepped forward, letting the moment settle. In the boardroom, the air tasted of polished oak and tension. Executives lined a long table, Isolde among them, stiff and calculating. She tried to smile but failed. I stood before them, folder clasped in both hands. Marcia sat beside me, composed. Isolde opened with brittle calm. "Rowena, your appearance here is dramatic. After all this time, do you really believe you have a right to speak?" A murmur fluttered through the room. I cleared my throat. "I don't expect appreciation. I demand recognition. Everything in this binder is time-stamped, notarized, and copied to 3 independent agencies." Silence swallowed the space between words. One board member, Mr. Carrington, stood, voice unsteady. "I warned you, Isolde. You crossed too many lines." Isolde's face hardened. She flipped through a document. She was unstable. She left voluntarily. I inhaled, calmly measured. I was silenced. That's not the same thing. I did not leave my legacy behind. From within the binder, I drew the duplicate copy of my father's will, sealed, the clause visible. I set it on the table and turned on the tablet linked to a short video message buried in the drive. His face filled the screen. His voice, calm, firm. "If you're watching this, it means my youngest has been betrayed. She's the only one I trust with our legacy." Gasps fluttered, eyes widened. The room vibrated with tension. Isolde's composure cracked, the color drained from her face. I closed the video. The boardroom felt hollow, as though stripped bare of pretense. I leaned forward. You can deny history, manipulate records, reshape narratives, but what you cannot erase is truth. And starting now, that truth belongs to me. A board member pounded the gavel, calling for order. Murmurs grew into voice. Security stepped closer behind Isolde. She reached for a retort, but none came. I stood, voice steady. "By tomorrow, the press will have the full story, unless someone wants to step down quietly today." In that final moment, the room held its breath. I stepped into the lobby, my heart steeled. That morning's statement still rang in my ears. By tomorrow, the press will have the full story, unless someone wants to step down quietly today. Now the air crackled with backlash. Within minutes, my phone buzzed non-stop. My sister had triggered a press conference, twisting what should have been justice into scandal. Her opening line, live-streamed across local news channels. "We are under a coordinated attack from an unstable former family member seeking vengeance." Her tone feigned concern, but the statement was weaponized rhetoric. On my very screen, headlines flashed, "Founder gone rogue? Crisis at Evergold. Insider claims fraud." The insinuation, I was unstable, unfit, dangerous. The phone in my hand felt heavy with betrayal. I moved to an empty meeting room near the press area. Marcia joined me quietly, casting worried glances at the monitors beyond glass walls. I forced calm in my voice. "Let her lie. We'll show what's real." We contacted Avery, a trusted technologist, and asked him to probe the leaked financial report's metadata. Less than an hour later, he called back, taut with alarm. "Rowena, the report's creation date is yesterday. The file was authored via her assistant's login credentials." A sick twist of irony. She used her tools against me. Without hesitation, I recorded a short video. Me, raw, direct. "If I were guilty," I said, voice steady, "I wouldn't have dared to return. And I certainly wouldn't be holding my father's will. I pressed upload and watched it ripple online. Comments poured in, thousands defending me, thousands demanding answers. Just as the backlash began to tilt, Darian appeared in the hallway, eyes red. He looked at me, shame and regret in equal measure. "I'm sorry," he said, voice soft. "I leaked part of the file. They promised me a promotion." My throat clenched. Betrayal from an ally hurt deeper, but I hid the sting. I turned away for a moment, breathing, then faced him. "I thought you believed in me. Turns out you just believed in power." He hung his head. "I made a mistake." I nodded curtly. "Fix it." Then I walked past him toward the boardroom. Inside, Marcia and Avery waited with evidence, signed logs, backup copies, archived snapshots. The media crews were queued in the hallway outside, cameras ready. I entered with purpose. The room silenced. Isolde stood, lips trembling. She glared at me. The board members fluttered uneasily between statements. The falsified report lay open on a table. I cleared my throat. "You called me unstable. That report was born yesterday, using credentials that belong to your own inner circle. I will not be written out." I placed the will beside it. "My father's instructions were clear. He intended me to hold the legacy if anyone ever abused it. I have his words. I have proof." Gasps. Board members swiveled, eyes wide. She tried to refute it. "That's doctored, fabricated." I raised a hand. "Funny how you call me delusional when your fingerprints are all over it." Avery stood, projecting logs and cross-checks on the screen. He walked the room through every alteration, timestamp, crossover entry. My heart thundered. None of this was collateral. It was composition. Then Darian entered behind us quietly, face pale. He approached a board member and passed a folder. He looked at me, voice trembling but clear. "I want to own my role in this. Here, these are the files I withheld." He sank to his knees. Shock cracked through the room. But this was more than theater. This was justice unraveling. As light from the windows sharpened, I looked to Isolde. She stood between two worlds, power and exposure. I spoke softly, but so all could hear. "I've been patient long enough. Now, it's time for consequences." In that moment, the boardroom held its breath. I stepped into the hearing room just past 9 a.m., the early light filtering through tall windows. The air tasted of polished wood and tension. Board members were already seated. Isolde sat at the head, flanked by lawyers and advisors in crisp suits. I carried the will and my binder, heart steady, mind clear. I'd walked past the press hallway, cameras lining the corridor, media crews assembled. Their lenses had followed me through the foyer. Whispers drifted behind my coat. But here, in this panel room, the performance shifted. This was the internal courtroom where truth would weigh heavier than appearances. Marcia stood to my left, her calm radiating purpose. She introduced my case. Falsified documents, abuse of power, breach of fiduciary duty. She methodically laid out each accusation, signed logs, transferred shares, altered entries. The mood became charged. Some board faces went pale, others restless. Isolde rose, flanked by her team. She tried to contradict every point, slinging insinuations about my past, casting doubt on my stability. I waited, watching her lips move, parsing each claim. Then I stood, drew a breath, and produced the will. I recited the clause aloud. In the event of 3 or more verified violations by any trustee, the minority heir shall assume control. Heads turned. Gasps echoed. She attempted to stand, to object, but security behind her stood firm. "Please be seated." I watched the board members trade glances. I said, firm but measured. "This is not about revenge. It's about integrity. My father entrusted me." He foresaw this moment. They voted, 6 in favor, 1 opposed. The gavel struck. Isolde's shoulders slumped. She was removed. The hearing adjourned in a swirl of whispered deals and shifting loyalties. I stood, recognized as interim president of the board. Press flooded the hallway. Cameras clicked. In the hallway, I stepped forward. With one hand raised, I addressed assembled media. "We will rebuild trust, brick by brick." Flashbulbs popped. Voices echoed across networks. Then I walked into Isolda's office, her office no longer. She sat behind the desk, packing boxes, her face drained, eyes hollow. I closed the door behind me without speaking. She looked at me. "You think this makes you better than me?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. But it does mean you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." She exhaled. The room felt heavy with years of betrayal and regret. I turned and left, closing the door behind me. I left her office carrying a quiet victory. The sun had risen to mid-morning, soft light spilling through the building's windows, warming the corridors that once felt cold to me. I walked down the marble stairs, each step echoing like affirmation. I was back. My new office, modest, yet full of purpose, sat on the top floor. Walls painted in pale cream, a wide window overlooking the city skyline. There, I watched interns, young women in smart blouses and skirts, sit in a training circle, learning the ethics I had bled for. My heart aches with hope. Darian came by, standing in the doorway, badge in hand. I gestured to a chair. He sat. He looked at me, not with guilt, but acceptance. I said softly, "You made your choice. Now live with it. I have no hate left." He nodded, voice thick. "Thank you for believing I could change." Later, I drove to our old family home. The route was familiar, tree-lined streets, dusty lawns, the house's silhouette dark in early afternoon. I climbed the front porch steps and pushed open the door. And the scent of old carpeting, stale air, and faded paint enveloped me. In the living room, the wood-paneled wall held a faint carving, my name, scratched into a baseboard years ago. I pressed a finger to it, letting memory ripple. I recalled a younger me on my father's desk, drafting opening balance sheets, mapping branches by hand. I remembered how he'd smiled when I brought the ledger to him. My eyes blurred with affection and regret. I whispered, "Sometimes they don't see us, but we still grow." Back home, I opened my phone. News alerts about Isolda. A nonprofit investigating her redevelopment projects claimed elderly residents were displaced without proper notice. Her reputation was in tatters. I read an article noting former CEO under scrutiny for community harm. I felt no glee, only a solemn sense of justice finally stirring. That evening, I met my daughter at a quiet cafe, not downtown, but a small neighborhood spot we used long ago. She greeted me with that same soft smile I'd missed. We ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching dusk fall. She looked up, eyes clear. "Mom, I'm proud you didn't break." I closed my eyes for a moment, emotion coiling in my chest. "Thank you," I said. "It wasn't easy." She reached across and took my hand. We talked about therapy, about boundaries, about building something honest this time. We didn't promise perfection. We promised effort. She leaned forward and said, "I'm glad you came home." I smiled softly and said, "It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest." Later that night, long after the world quieted, I sat by my window, looking out over the city skyline. The lights sparkled. Somewhere below was that bank, Evergold Trust, reclaimed. I whispered to the darkness. That day at the bank wasn't just when I took back my name. It was the day I gave myself permission to stop asking to be seen. The end. Sometimes the greatest power isn't revenge, it's reclaiming your name and walking forward without needing approval. This story reminds us that family can either build you or break you. But in the end, it's your choices that define who you are. Have you ever had to rise above betrayal from those closest to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional, true life stories. There's always more to uncover.